to this week's edition of Hot 5 Friday. Hot 5 Friday gives you a hot 5 issues in cybersecurity GRC for a hot 5 minutes. Links to articles will be in the comments or video description. Before we jump into this week's Hot 5, I'd like to take a moment to thank Chris Krebs for his service in securing our election data. To quote Mr. Krebs, keep calm and count on. News abounds around the proposed new Canadian privacy law. Introduced on November 17th, it looks to levy fines of 5% of global revenue or $25 million, whichever is greater, for serious offenses, making it the highest fines among G7 nations. It would also allow the Federal Privacy Commissioner to have order-making powers and require companies to use plain language, not legal jargon, when obtaining consumer consent. The proposed bill focuses on 5 areas: meaningful consent, data mobility, disposal of personal information and withdrawal of consent, algorithmic transparency, and de-identified information. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Office of the National Coordinator for Health Information Technology, ONC, published an interim final rule this week, pushing back the compliance date for its information blocking provisions under the Cures Act to April 5, 2021. The information blocking provisions prohibit covered actors from interfering with access, exchange, or use of electronic health information, unless this comes into conflict with other regulations or one of the ONC-defined exceptions. The provision intends to promote interoperability and empower patients to manage their own health care. For covered entities that have been overly restrictive with data sharing under the HIPAA privacy and security rules, the information blocking prohibition seeks to ensure patients can access their EHI and have it shared with necessary parties. Despite the continued partisanship we're seeing in U.S. politics, the U.S. Senate unanimously and bipartisanly approved the Internet of Things Cybersecurity Improvement Act on November 17th. Although the legislation only applies to government-purchased internet-connected devices, it directs the National Institute of Standards and Technology to create minimum security requirements for IoT devices. Looking forward, this might be the first step to having a more cohesive approach to IoT security in general, since where the federal government regulates itself, it often seeks to expand legislative activities to the private sector as well. This week, the White House released a guidance for regulation of artificial intelligence application. The executive order sets out 10 principles for the stewardship of AI applications that agencies need to consider. From a GRC standpoint, the guidance suggests a risk assessment and risk management practice. This would include, quote, those that negatively impact privacy, civil rights, civil liberties, confidentiality, security, and safety, end quote, and that agencies, quote, should adopt a tiered approach in which the degree of risk and consequences of both success and failure of the technology determines the regulatory approach, end quote. Interestingly, the order also focuses on fairness and non-discrimination because, quote, applications can, in some instances, introduce real-world bias that produces discriminatory outcomes or decisions that undermine public trust and confidence in AI or be used in other ways that violate anti-discrimination statutes, end quote. And although technically this last piece of news is from last week, it's still valuable enough to make Hot 5 for this week. New research shows that the cybersecurity talent gap has been reduced. A study from ISC2 conducted between mid-April and June of this year showed an addition of 700,000 professionals added this year, which is a 25% growth rate. A 95,000 workforce member decrease in the global workforce shortage. Increased job satisfaction. It also shows that only 49% of those interviewed have a degree in computer science or InfoSec, indicating a broad array of expertise coming into the field. And 40% of respondents believed the most in-demand skill set was cloud security. And that's it for this week's edition of Hot 5 Friday. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend and a fabulous Thanksgiving.